Today's tutorial is all about how I made this stained glass window. I'm going to take you through all of the stages involved from designing through to making this window, starting right now. This is a small sample panel based on a larger rose window I made a few years ago for the Halley Orchestra up in Manchester here in the UK, and it takes all of the design ideas and all of the techniques that were used in making that rose window and applied them to this small scale piece. So I'm going to take you through all of the stages of how I made this window. So we start with our design concept. So this is a concept that I rendered from my photographs of the original rose window and printed it out using Photoshop. What I'm doing now is drawing the design out on paper. So I've got my rectangular box drawn out here, which is the size of the panel that I want making. And now I'm roughly sketching out all of the various elements that are to be added to the design. So I'm putting my violin motif in here. I've pre-printed a drawing of a violin that I wanted to use, so I printed it out on paper and stuck it down into the design. It just speeds up the process rather than drawing the whole violin out one more time. To that, I'm adding all of my other elements, my leaf designs and my decorative background areas to the design in pencil before filling in the lead lines using a Sharpie pen here, which indicate to me where all of my breaks or cuts in the glass are going to be. So this black line represents the heart of the lead, and it delineates each of the separate pieces of glass that I'm going to cut into shapes. I'm now doing some shading ideas here, just using a graphite pencil to quickly sketch in various elements that I want added, because I'm just working through the whole process of what I want to paint, the pieces of glass that I actually want to texturize and paint. So I'm going through the process with a graphite pencil, just filling in the background here with the notion of then using this background motif to create the final designs with glass paint. Now that I've sketched out my initial design, I'll move to the next stage, which is drawing the cartoon. In terms of stained glass, the cartoon is the plan made up of line work, which represents where we're going to cut all of our pieces of glass. So the traditional way to do it is with tracing paper like this. So I'm putting tracing paper over the top of my original drawing, and I'm going to trace out one more time using a Sharpie pen all of the separate pieces of glass with a black Sharpie pen. So this is going to be my master plan, as it were, the final cuts for each piece of glass, very carefully drawn out. And again, you've just got to take your time drawing this out as carefully as you can to represent exactly how you want the glass cut. Now we come to the next stage, which is glass selection. This is the wonderful stage where you start to pull out reserves of glass. Oh my goodness, look at the state of that glass. Yes, some of my glass is quite dirty. It's been in the storeroom for a long time. So I'm going to start the cutting process wearing my protective goggles so that I don't get splinters in my eyes, and putting a little bit of oil reserve on the tip of the glass cutter. I'm having a little look now at all the glass types that I've pulled out of the reserve of glass, and there's a lovely selection of handmade streakies, gold pinks, pot metals and flash glass types as well. Now flash glass is an interesting one because it's a thin piece of glass with another veneer of colour over the top of it, and you can actually etch through the flashed glass to reveal the colour of the glass underneath. So I'll be doing quite a lot of etching in this design, and I'll show you that process later on in this tutorial. So we're beginning the cutting stage now. So very carefully laying our glass on top of our cartoon using our light table, and we begin the process of cutting the glass. I usually use my hands to break the glass. On previous tutorials, I've certainly shown up other techniques of using running pliers, and running pliers and breaking pliers are great additional tools, especially if you're a beginner with cutting glass. But if you've been doing it for a while, it tends to be much quicker just to use your hands, as I'm doing here, doing a little tapping gesture and then carefully breaking the glass along the score line. Once I've cut each piece of glass, I test it up against the original cartoon, and then I put an X just to remind myself that I've actually cut that piece of glass. If you don't mark what you've cut, you quite easily can recut a piece of glass, forgetting that you've cut it once already. I save all of my remnants of glass. Sometimes they can be reused, but often the pieces are too small to reuse, and unfortunately they just get recycled. Learning how to cut glass is a skill that's acquired with time. A lot of people ask how to cut glass carefully and well, and really there's a simple procedure, but it does take a lot of practice to get good at it, especially if the glass is textured or if it's a streaky glass with a rough edge to it. It can be really challenging to cut sometimes, so be patient with yourself, take your time, and don't use too much force, because that's when you end up cutting yourself. So now we're moving on to applying a resist. I'm using a rubber-based glue here, which is great for applying a resist to the glass. And I'm putting this rubber-based glue across the flashed glass. So I'm protecting some areas of the flashed glass. Remember, that's a sort of coloured veneer over an existing piece of glass. So in this instance here, we've got orange veneer flash over a clear glass underneath. And here we have some blue flashed glass over clear glass underneath, and I'm putting this glue on to protect some areas before we etch it. Here I'm cleaning my grinder. The glass grinder needs to be cleaned pretty regularly because the sediment that builds up in the water reservoir within the grinder, and it's really important to keep that thing clean, so regularly brushing it down like this. Using an old toothbrush, a battery-operated toothbrush, is really helpful. It just gets into those little bits, those nooks and crannies that are hard to get to. Today I'm using the Grinder 2, which is an American glass grinder, which I bought recently. And I'll leave links to the review on this glass grinder somewhere in this video. It's a good glass grinder if you're in the business of trying to source a new one. I certainly recommend looking at this particular glass grinder as an option. I'm grinding the rough edges of any pieces of glass before I start the painting process. It's important to do the grinding before you actually paint the glass, so you eliminate the risk of damaging your glass brushes. Using a sandblaster to etch the flashed glass off the surface. And here you can see we're now removing the rubberized glue resist, and you can see the changes in color tone between the light blue and the dark blue. With some of the light blue areas, I've had the sandblaster removing the flashed glass. The darker areas of blue are the original pieces of glass that have been protected by the resist. So our sandblasting is now complete, and you can see various textural effects that are created on the flashed glass. This is the stage that's carried out before we begin painting on the glass. So today we're mixing up some tracing black paint, mixing it with water and a little bit of gum arabic, just to create a toothpaste consistency before we apply it to the surface of the glass, giving it a good mix. We're now applying a little bit of liquid gum arabic. It's an important element to add to the paint mixture because it helps the paint to stick to the glass. It also helps the paint to flow from the bristles of the brush. If you don't add a gum arabic, you find that the paint doesn't work nearly so well. So we're applying now a thin wash of paint to the surface of the glass, and then using our badger brush just to thin that paint down until it's just a very translucent glaze of paint on the surface of the glass before we start texturizing it. So I'm using some combing effects. You can see those horizontal lines are created with combing effects across the surface of the glass. And again, I'll leave links to another tutorial video which explains the combing technique in more detail for you if you want to have a look at that video after watching this one. If you like the content on my channel, by the way, please do leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because I make lots of inspirational videos and tutorials like this all about stained glass, because I'm really keen to pass on the skills that I've learned over 40 years making stained glass windows to you, the next generation of stained glass creatives. Now we're applying some textures, some stippling effects to the paint before we fire the paint in our kiln. So the kiln I'm using today is a gas-powered kiln. It's a propane gas kiln. Unfortunately, these types of kilns are hard to come by. They're not made anymore. Sometimes you can pick up second-hand gas kilns online, but they are quite hard to come by. Modern glass kilns tend to be electric. The kiln bed that we're putting the glass onto is calcium carbonate, which is basically chalk, powdered chalk. I've just flattened the kiln shelf before putting the glass in and firing it in the kiln. So now we're at the next stage, which is leading the glass panel. Again, we're using traditional techniques here, where we're using a lead knife and traditional pieces of lead cut to shape the same way that it's been done for centuries. In fact, medieval glass artists would recognize most of the hand tools that you see on the screen today. Horseshoe nails, farrier's nails, breaking pliers, a hammer, a glass cutter and some lead. Very simple technology, developed in the Middle Ages, and the same techniques are used to this very day. We construct our window very much like a jigsaw puzzle, making all the pieces fit in together, carefully cutting the lead and mitring the joints so that there are no gaps between each of the lead pieces before we move on to the next stage. I use wooden battens like this to make sure the final panel is made to the correct size, checking the measurements and the angles before moving on to the next stage, which is applying flux. Today I'm using a tallow candle, which is an animal fat, usually sheep fat, but you can use water-soluble fluxes or acid-based fluxes as well. I'm using a Weller 100-watt electric soldering iron with some blowpipe solder, 60% tin, 40% lead. Before cleaning the tallow off and having a look at the panel for the very first time, it's always exciting to see the panel for the first time with natural light behind it. And there we have it, our finished panel using all of the traditional techniques that were used from medieval periods to this very day to create stained glass. Hope you enjoyed today's video. Remember to leave a like and comments and suggestions for any future videos you'd like me to make. And you can always buy me a coffee if you feel so inclined. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye for now.